Hey, I'm Jennifer King from Dysgraphia Life, and I'm thrilled to be here with you on International Dysgraphia Awareness Day. And today I'm going to talk about both practical and playful strategies to help students with dysgraphia. So first of all, who are we? Dysgraphia Life was started really just as a website, and it's grown from there. You can find us at www.dysgraphia.life. But really, we're an organization that brings education and information, resources, share success stories. We have a very popular expert webinar series focused predominantly for parents of students with dysgraphia. We have an ebook about how to write good goals around written expression, a professionals database to help you find someone who might be able to help yourself or your student. And we have a new online educational platform called Dysgraphia Learn that has both courses for educators as well as an archive of those free expert webinars. So we really are trying to provide as much useful, helpful, practical, evidence-based information as we can around dysgraphia, because as most of you probably know, if you're here for International Dysgraphia Awareness Day, dysgraphia has not gotten as much attention around awareness, around research, or around effective interventions, improving the evidence for them as we would like. So check us out. We are here to help. So just a quick point about why writing is important. Many of you are probably aware of this, but this is from a booklet that we did with Don Johnston and Text Help, where we talked to 200 school staff and asked them about writing instruction in their schools. And so really, you can see some quotes here along one side of the slide, but what really came out was that writing was critical for students because it was a skill that crossed everything that they were doing. It was the way they demonstrated knowledge, not just in English or language arts class, but in every class. And it's really how they would communicate ideas and express ideas. This doesn't stop from just being in school or being a student. Writing is critically important in the workplace, and it's important to engage in our digital world. And we'll talk about that a little bit later too. But writing really is a key form of communication that crosses all aspects of everything that a student is doing. So then what is dysgraphia? You've probably heard this from other people. You can give entire talks on different definitions of dysgraphia and why they're out there. But we take a really broad view of dysgraphia, that dysgraphia is a specific learning disability that makes it difficult for students to express their thoughts in writing. And so this is very consistent with some published literature. This is one review written by a pediatrician that really talks about this broad definition of dysgraphia, where it's a disorder of writing, but that can include problems with letter formation and legibility, with letter spacing, with spelling, fine motor coordination, rate of writing, grammar, and composition. So very broad. And that is how I'm going to frame the talk today and talk about just a few practical strategies to think about a few of these different areas for students. So this is what usually comes up. How can I help? Whether you're a parent or an educator, often we have people reaching out saying, I have a student who is struggling. How can I help them? And I'm going to try to keep some of the tips today to this theme of the day of let's play and write. So with that play theme, we're going to focus today on elementary school. And these are kind of the 4 key areas that we see that you want to think about helping students in elementary school. So at this early age, it's a key time to focus on handwriting intervention. At the same time, we do not want to give up handwriting, but we want to also introduce and teach technology skills. And I'll talk to all of these a little bit more later. Spelling and grammar rules are important. We believe in structured literacy. It's being used very effectively for some students in the dyslexia space. And this structured approach to phonics, often Orton Gillingham-based curriculum, are really also helping with literacy for students with dysgraphia too. We'd like to see more research on that, proving that out, but anecdotally, we do see a lot of benefit in our dysgraphic students. And then explicit composition instruction. And you'll realize throughout this talk that explicit instruction is one of my themes. This can count organization of ideas, sentences and paragraphs, teaching them explicitly, and then of course, editing. So we'll now walk through some of these and some ideas kind of focused on play and what are some playful ideas you could incorporate into teaching in these different areas. So first, handwriting. There are reasons to still teach handwriting, even in our digital age. And there was foundational work by Virginia Berner and her colleagues showing that multi-sensory learning was really important for handwriting. And that was really important process in all of language learning. So when we think about teaching students, we should really think about teaching them in multi-sensory ways. There's studies in kindergarteners showing that handwriting had the correlation with overall written expression. So learning handwriting can help your broader language skills. Similarly, reading and spelling. And there's even studies in adults showing that handwriting practice can improve literacy more than non-motor learning like typing when adults are learning other languages or languages and characters outside of our English alphabet. So lots of different references that basically are saying that yes, teaching handwriting can be important and it is an important skill. Now, I know there have been other occupational therapists, OTs, who have talked today, including Kelly Federer, who we have worked with on a number of things in the past. So I'm not going to go too much into the specifics of handwriting, but I wanted to really frame that handwriting piece is important. But what is really important as we think about our students is handwriting with a purpose. There's a difference between writing purposefully to help learn handwriting, to help learn literacy skills, and just copying and unnecessary writing. And we find that large amounts of copying can really negatively impact students by putting unneeded stress. The classic example of this is copying your list of homework off the board. This is a pretty common task, or has been in schools, when something as simple as snapping a picture for older students who might have a phone, or having the assignments given out, or even having someone else put them in your book for you may actually be just as beneficial. That type of copying does not tend to help benefit students and really help their literacy skills. For our dysgraphic students who may experience pain, stress, anxiety while writing, focusing the writing time on purposeful instruction can really be helpful and make a difference. And so as we think about the play in that, how can you capitalize on the students' strengths and interests and really have their time spent handwriting be something that is fun for them? So this is just sort of a case example of a second grade boy with dysgraphia who wanted to be a veterinarian when he grew up. And he was generally very writing resistant. But when he started working with an occupational therapist, she had him pick an animal out of a book, trace it and color it, working on those fine motor skills in the drawing. And then they would write a few sentences of things he could learn about that type of animal. Then editing practice, we'll talk about editing a little bit more later, but you can practice editing those sentences, grammar, capitalization, punctuation, neat handwriting. You can see here they also used an accommodation of spacing paper with little tick marks to really create a final piece that the student was very proud of. And he went home and told his parents that he loved to write when it was about animals. The student had been very writing resistant. When you found the right topic and the right interest, now was saying he loved to write. And he ended up putting together a whole book of these different animals that he wrote about. So it just goes to show that when you make it fun, you make it playful, you make it something they're interested in, you can really have a big impact. So that's one writing example. What about spelling? Spelling is one of the classic areas that we see dysgraphic students be frustrated because, as you may remember, there's a lot of spelling handouts. There's spelling handouts where you get a list of words and you're just supposed to copy them and then cover them and try to write them again. There are a lot of spelling handouts, a lot of writing, and that is not always the best multi-sensory way for a student with dysgraphia to learn. So take a minute, think about what's one way that you could teach spelling without a worksheet. Okay, so let's get some ideas. These are magnet letters. You can spell out your words manipulating larger letters. Same concept with these Scrabble-like tiles to build words, writing in sand, and you can even do this in a sand table, not on the actual beach. It gives a huge amount of multi-sensory input where you can feel that sand. Singing. Everybody knows from a certain era, knows how to spell respect because of the sing-along. There are certain students that singing the words, singing everything actually helps them remember and understand. Here's, again, playing, tiles, manipulatives, and tapping is one of the classic ways that in some Orton Gillingham approaches, they really have you sound out the phonetical structure of the words. So there are a lot of ways to think about teaching spelling, teaching phonics, teaching basic rules, explicit instruction without those writing workshops, and making it more fun and more playful. Now, I keep saying explicit writing instruction over and over again, and that's because it's so important to the writing process and learning literacy skills. This is actually a practice guide that was put out by the United States Institute of Education Sciences all the way back in 2012. But I think it's really important because here they really looked at the evidence for different types of recommendations around writing. And the one that had the strongest evidence was teaching students to use the writing process, explicitly teaching this writing process, and then teaching the different variety of purposes for how you write. Examples, that was for older students, different types of writing. And second to that was teaching students explicitly how to become fluent in teaching handwriting, teaching spelling, teaching sentence construction, teaching typing, teaching word processing. So again, this is where this theme of teaching the skills explicitly, not just assuming they will sort of pick it up from you can see the first one is daily time for students to write. That's not bad, but without that explicit instruction, it doesn't appear to be having as much impact. So with that, and thinking about explicit instruction, writing is a process. And here's two different processes and ways you can think about writing. They're similar and interrelated, but no matter what, you can think about writing as planning, drafting, sharing, evaluating, revising, or over on the right, we have pre-writing, which is that drafting, planning and drafting kind of phase. And then they put in editing and publishing. There's lots of different frameworks. It doesn't necessarily matter which one you're using, but making sure that you're thinking about all these steps and how you're teaching a student to walk through these steps is really important. So this is from that Institute of Education Sciences booklet again, and this is a fun, playful example of applying the writing process in an upper elementary classroom. So this is thinking all about robots and how do they take robots into their writing process. And so they talked about robots, they talked about parts of robots, toy robots, had pictures of robots, they had robots doing, I had like this example, telescopes on their heads to see great distances, but you can think of many different uses for robots. And so there was a fun activity all around robots and discussions and what are you most interested in, all of that went into the planning process. Then they created diagrams and pictures similar to that story that I told you about the animals. They drafted thinking about these pictures and visuals, and that helped them write their stories about robots, in this case, about how they became friends with a robot and what they did together. And they used diagrams and visuals and other types of things to illustrate their story. Then they shared their story with one another, provided critical feedback, typically both of their own story as well as of others, and then had a round of revising the stories. So you could then read your story out loud after that and get more comments back and revise again. So rounds of revision, but we're still the whole time talking about robots, which is something that the class was really interested in and energized about. And at the end, they published their robot stories in a class book that they could all be proud of. So just a good example of how you can take a really fun topic and teach a whole class through this explicit writing process. Again, some students with dysgraphia will be very stressed about the writing part themselves. So it's great to be able to teach the writing process with all the writing as we just talked about, but there are also ways to strengthen skills without explicit writing that you can think about. So here's an example we often recommend to parents when their students are home for the summer, but it can also be used in classrooms as well. This is basically a playful, fun way to write a structured paragraph without actually writing it. So if you're doing an activity or talking about a certain interest, you can say, well, what did you think about that? That's essentially your topic sentence. Why? What are 3 reasons that you felt that way? Or depending what it is, what are 3 things you liked the most or you disliked the most? Put in there, here are your 3 examples, here are your 3 reasons that support your original topic. And then at the end, why is that important? What did you learn about that? Come up with a concluding sentence. If you can get the student to talk about these things in this structured way, they've basically just written the same type of paragraph that they would want to write as a school essay. They've just done it verbally and not put the stress in of, oh, I have to do an assignment today. And so this is a way you can really think about teaching them the planning, the composition of thoughts and the thought process without actually having to put it in on the paper. The skills do not have to be taught at the exact same time. I do want to comment on assistive technology. I talked about how handwriting instruction is really important, but it is true that this day and age, most students will eventually transition to typing. So teaching early keyboarding skills can really help kids with their written expression. We also now see a lot better speech to text technology as AI evolves. The speech to text is really improving quickly. And these are ways that you can do things similar to what we did in the last paragraph. If you use speech to text for that, or you had the student type because they could type those thoughts faster than they could write it, they can get their thoughts out. And sometimes that step of getting your composition, your thoughts out on paper is really key. To our play theme, there are free, fun keyboarding games. Dance mat typing is pretty fun for typing basics. I know a number of kids that really loved Nitro Type, where there's race cars racing each other as you try to pick up your speed. You're racing against the other cars. So there's definitely an element of play that can come into learning those typing skills as well. And then I can't leave out editing, which is a little bit less fun, but so, so important, especially in our age of assistive technology. As you think about if you voice type something, there are going to be mistakes. There's going to be grammar issues. It might punctuate or capitalize wrong. Going through an editing checklist is really, really critical as you start to use that type of technology, but even in regular school practice. And so we want to make sure that students are taught how to edit and how to go through an editing checklist. You can do this, passing around papers and, hey, help grade each other's paper, help each other edit. How would you do this? How would you make this better? Turn it into games. Who can catch the mistakes? There are some fun ways to do it, although I admit editing is probably one of the least playful activities here. So these skills, however, are really important and will really carry students forward. And also reflecting on, oh, I did a good job on that, but I left out a lot of capitals or a lot of periods. That reflection on what you edited and how you had to revise can also really help your editing the next time around. So in summary, writing skills of all types need to be explicitly taught, particularly to students with dysgraphia. That doesn't mean, however, that you can't make it fun. Now, think about reducing burden, only using that handwriting that they struggle with purposefully. When is it meaningful and when can it be replaced by a non-written activity? There are fun ways to teach writing without students actually writing, and you can reinforce those spelling, grammar, and composition skills. So thank you for your time today. You can find Dysgraphia Life online, as I said, at www.dysgraphia.life. And we also have our online education platform, Dysgraphia Learn, at learn.dysgraphia.life. And you can always reach out to me at jennifer@dysgraphia.life. Thank you very much. And please join me in spreading awareness about dysgraphia. Thank you for having me.